Out of all the letters written by the Apostle Paul, Galatians was the first. As a matter of fact, the book of Galatians is the oldest book in the New Testament, written around 48 AD to the church of Galatia located in what we know as modern-day Turkey. On Paul's very first missionary journey, he preached the gospel to Galatia and they received it so well. They were one of the first churches planted by Paul, and so they were like children to him. He was like their father, and he was so heavily invested into their lives. So you can imagine the frustration that he had when he found out about some people throwing the church into confusion, twisting the truth, perverting the gospel truth that he taught to them. The tension that Paul had to address was this: do Gentile believers need to be circumcised and follow the law of Moses? For context, you can read Acts chapter 15 at the Council of Jerusalem when Paul and Barnabas addressed this question with all the leaders. The decision was made that Gentile believers only needed to follow 3 requirements of the Old Testament law, and circumcision was not one of them. So imagine the Supreme Court for church. Once a decision is made, churches need to come into alignment. So the book of Galatians was written to address the church for believing a distorted message of the gospel. These 6 chapters can be broken down into 3 different themes: to protect the gospel, to clarify the gospel, and he encourages them to walk out the gospel. So let's look at these. Chapters 1 and 2, Paul wants to protect the gospel. He knew that any addition or subtraction from the gospel that he preached to them would be a perversion or not a complete gospel, not even a gospel at all. He knew that the gospel, the good news of Jesus, was the only thing that could set people free from the bondage of sin and slavery. So he was adamant to preserve and protect this priceless message. He says this: "But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse." That's serious business. Paul encourages the church to protect the pure message of the gospel at all cost. Chapters 3 and 4, Paul wants to clarify the gospel. After asking 6 very rhetorical questions, he goes on to clarify that righteousness comes by faith and not by observing the law. For thousands of years, the Jewish people lived by the law of Moses and held tightly to every law and every Jewish tradition. So you can see how righteousness by faith in Jesus is a complete change of thinking for the Jewish believers. So Paul has to carefully meticulously walk through the Old Testament, explaining to them that even Abraham, who was the father of the Israelites, was made right with God by faith 430 years before the law was ever written. He says this: "So also Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness." Paul clarified the gospel by explaining that Jesus has set us free from the bondage of slavery in the law. It is Jesus, faith in Jesus, that leads to righteousness. Chapters 5 and 6, Paul encourages them to walk out the gospel. Galatians 5:1, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." That's it right there. Paul urges the churches to keep moving forward in grace, not in following the law, but in the grace of Jesus. Galatians 5 says the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Paul goes on to say that if you are walking in the Spirit, then you will have the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You see, he's very harsh with anyone teaching a different gospel. Anyone teaching a distorted gospel, they're going to hear from Paul. But he's gracious to anyone who is caught in sin. He actually tells the church this, to gently restore them if they're caught in sin. Sounds a lot like Jesus when he said, "He who is without sin, cast the first stone." And finally, Paul wraps up everything, pointing it back to Jesus. He states that the only thing that he can boast in is the cross of Jesus, and the only thing that counts is the new creation in him. So we have an invitation to live in freedom. Faith in Jesus is what leads to righteousness. The gospel, the good news of Jesus is freedom. And it's not just for when we get saved, but it's for every area of life at every moment in life. As a hope carrier, our responsibility is not to condemn people of their sin, but to lead them to freedom.